and sleep and exercise, and if we can just touch on some of those in relation to the aging process, and the it's very hard. There's so much information around nutritionally, and there are so many diets and nutritional fads, and we've all heard of them: low protein, high protein. It's particular of interest to me. I've been a vegetarian since I was a teenager, and like after a number of years, I stopped trying to be prescriptive on what I was missing. People were always saying, you're missing this, and you're not getting enough of this. And I went on simple markers such as, how I felt, what my energy levels were, what my tiredness levels were, immune levels instinctively, like were you picking up like colds or flus. And over time, I just found a system, a diet system that worked for me within the what was allowed, as a vegetarian, and that worked for me. And I know, like, if you probably mention it to a nutritionist, they say some things are good, some things are bad. But how can people learn what is best for them in relation to aging? Like, how can they pick a diet that's right for them? Is it individual, or is there tips or advice that you can give listeners?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I would say my own personal experience sort of sounds like it's paralleled yours, that over time I've sort of figured out what seems to work, well for me in kind of the same way that you described, right? Paying attention to how I feel, how much energy I have, how often I get sick. And that's kind of unsatisfying, I know, to a lot of people. But honestly, I think that's really, really important. And the first thing I would say is, probably 90%, and that's probably a low estimate of what you're going to find out there on the internet from the diet gurus, is just guesswork. I largely ignore it. I don't have a lot of faith in nutritionists by and large. The specific recommendations, because there's so much we don't understand about the sort of individual response to nutrition. I feel like it is probably a very individual phenotype in the sense that optimized nutrition is going to be different for different people. I think, the clear take homes are obesity is bad in general for health. So avoid being obese to the extent that you can. Try to maintain a healthy weight, but you have to kind of find the strategies that will work for you to be able to accomplish that. My intuition, and this may be based on my own personal experience, is that for most people, avoiding very simple carbohydrates is probably the foundation of a good nutritional strategy. I think, and that's not anything sort of earth-shattering. I think most people who pay attention to health would agree with that. But it's still sort of shocking how many people eat a diet very high in simple sugars. And again, depending on where you're at now, there are lots of strategies you can take to try to get closer to eliminating the simple sugars from your diet. But if you do one thing, that would be the one thing I would say most people could probably benefit from on a nutritional spectrum. Personally, I don't, and this is where I think in terms of the biology of aging, it gets a little bit complicated, because if you look at the mouse studies, right, that's most of the data that we have on dietary interventions and the effect on aging come from mouse studies. I'm not a big believer that the mouse studies are going to translate really well to humans in terms of specific dietary strategies that seem to increase lifespan in mice. And what I mean by that are things like, very extreme protein restriction or branched chain amino acid restriction. Number one, it's not pragmatic in most cases to do that in people. And number two, humans, we know as we get older, one of the leading causes of disability is loss of muscle mass with age. Yeah. And if you start restricting protein, it's very clear from the epidemiological studies that you dramatically increase your risk of loss of muscle mass as you get older. And that's like one of them, aside from not getting a disease and dying, that's probably the most important thing you want to avoid is sarcopenia. So I really am wary of trying to extrapolate from the mouse studies on protein or amino acid restriction and saying we should be doing that in humans. The other thing that kind of gets lost, and I know I'm going a little bit off on a tangent, but I think it's important for people to appreciate this, if you listen to some of the scientists in the field who are writing books on diet about anti-aging diets, they'll talk about caloric restriction as if it's this sort of miracle strategy for increasing lifespan. And it is absolutely true that caloric restriction, and we're talking 30 to 50% restriction of calories in mice, can increase lifespan pretty significantly. What those people never tell you is that in about 1/3 of genetic backgrounds in mice, caloric restriction actually shortens lifespan. Mm-hmm. And I'm personally pretty hesitant to go recommending to people that they should start adopting an intervention that shortens lifespan in 1/3 of genetic backgrounds in mice. So, and I only say this because I think sometimes the research gets presented as if it's, this clear cut, you should absolutely do this. And it's really not at this point. So that's why I try not to get into specific recommendations beyond maintain a healthy weight, cut out, simple sugars. I think that could probably benefit pretty much everybody. But then whether a, high protein, vegetarian, keto, whatever, which dietary strategy or blend of those works best for you, I think you've got to find. The last thing I'll say on this is, I think too often people get lost in trying to optimize or maximize their diet to the point where they feel deprived. And I think if you're feeling sort of chronically deprived with whatever nutritional strategy you're taking, that's a problem, because that's probably not going to work in the long term for you. So that's part of finding a strategy where you can maintain a healthy weight, not be obese, but also not feel like you're depriving yourself. And I think, again, this is where the animal studies fall down a little bit, because, humans are funny animals, right? We're very social. Our behavior is affected by, all sorts of aspects of our environment, including other people, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's pretty easy to restrict protein in a mouse. We can do that. The mouse doesn't have any choice. Humans have a choice. And so the psychological impact of trying to chronically deprive yourself, we can't model in an animal, but it's clearly really, really important in humans.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think there is a level of intuition which maybe isn't that scientific about, what works and what doesn't work. And, like, as we focus on health, it's really important. I think you touched on this, Matt, that, our focus on our physical health doesn't become detrimental to our mental health.
Absolutely.
Which then creates a loop back into our physical well-being. Yep.